Hi, I'm Courtney Morrison, and you're listening to Engagement Drivers, presented by EveryoneSocial. Each week, we'll share actionable tips, strategies, and success stories that you and your teams can use to steer your brand, social, and employee engagement in the right direction. Welcome back to the show. Today, I'm speaking with Mark Bilotta, Social Media and Communications Manager at OutSystems. Mark, I'm really pumped for this conversation. Thanks for joining me today.
I'm equally as pumped, and it's great to be a part of this. Thank you for inviting me.
So you have a lot of interesting experience and perspective on social media for brands, and I wanted to know from your standpoint, what do you see as the biggest challenge for marketers on social media today?
For sure. I feel like the obvious answer that a lot of social media managers would probably give is related to cutting through the noise, because there's so much going on across pretty much every major social media channel. So I'm sure that would be everybody else's answer. But I think one of the biggest things that a lot of people don't talk about enough is the fact that there's kind of an epidemic across a lot of different marketing vehicles and teams of talking at people or talking at their audience via social media, as opposed to talking with them and generating conversation and generating some form of back and forth with that audience and trying to identify with them. That is getting lost in a lot of areas. And a lot of companies don't really even know they're doing it because it's just operating business as usual. It turns into talking at versus talking with.
Yes. Starting a dialogue and engaging with a back and forth rather than one-sided is something that I think is neglected by a lot of companies on social channels. Why do you think that is? Why are companies stuck in that behavior?
It's an interesting thing because I never really anticipated this in working for the brands that I've worked for. And a lot of it comes down to a lot of insular thought or just spending so much time in your own internal bubble, if you will. So there's a lot of, what should the messaging be here, or what should the messaging be here, or focusing solely on branding and letting that, lead strategy and things of that nature. But there's really a give and take process that needs to happen, in order for you to be successful on social in getting your message out and identifying with the folks that you're trying to get it to. So there's kind of a combination of trying to make those things work in concert. And, it's really the brands that are the ones that are able to, work outside of themselves. It's almost, in the conversations that I've had, in my organization and in previous organizations, it's almost thinking of when you first joined your organization, what were your thoughts and feelings? Because that's literally exactly what a lot of people outside of your organization are immediately thinking. That's the mindset that you should try to maintain as much as humanly possible.
Yes, totally. I like what you said there about the bubble, because as, marketing team members, we're in this every day and we put a lot of thought and effort into crafting those messages and creating content. But sometimes you need to go outside of that. And that's something that at EveryoneSocial with employee advocacy that we really think is important, is getting other teams and other voices involved in sharing about the company.
Without a doubt. And I think it's really important from an employee advocacy perspective because, employee advocacy, you can really get into a mode of, oh, great, here are some new posts that I can share. And, this allows me to be social because I'm able to put things and update my channels. But then there's a second and third level that goes even beyond that, of turning yourself into more of a thought leader, turning yourself into more of a resource. I try to communicate as much as I can internally with my organization, OutSystems. The ability to be a resource becomes so important, both for any social media manager to tell everybody that they're working with, but also just in general across all teams. If you want to be active on social or be more social, the more that you can be a resource for your audience or to grow your following, things of that nature, it needs to be, as we begin talking about here, it's more of the give and take. It's more of crafting your own messages, speaking in your own terms the way you would, as opposed to using what folks had previously written for you. That's an area, again, that a lot of folks haven't yet gotten used to.
Yeah. What are some of the pitfalls for companies to avoid just talking at your audience and starting to talk with them?
a lot of it, I think it kind of goes on two different planes. The first one is, if you're looking at it as, focusing on your content production. So if you're spending all of your time just trying to figure out, okay, what are the fastest ways for us to get all of this info out into people's hands immediately? So a lot of companies will kind of get stuck in, let's get, 80 case studies out this year, or let's get, however many, news articles secured this year, or, different things like that. Focusing on that content production is almost putting the cart before the horse, if you will. You have to work backwards and think, what is it that your audience is looking for? And then trying to find content that maps directly to that. If you're mapping directly to audience pain points, that is something that's going to be wholly effective compared to, hey, we put out this press release and let's get it out as broadly as humanly possible. So it's just thinking about, content production in a different way. And then the second half of that is something I mentioned a little bit earlier, branding leading strategy. So I think, it's great that as an organization, you can establish your brand and make it one of the biggest brands, in your space and things like that. But it's also, it could become detrimental when that branding leads your strategy, especially on the social side, where everything is owned and operated around your branding colors, your branding identity, all of those kind of things. Whereas your audience, it doesn't necessarily matter as much in some cases that you're the company that's giving them this information. They just care about getting the information. They don't care that it comes from you. So that becomes particularly important. Not everything is owned by your brand. You need to start thinking forward about, what does my audience need and how do I get it to them? Not, is it in that proper brand format, or in that, that individual way that everything else that we've published has looked.
Sure. That's great advice. What have you found to be most successful when trying to increase audience engagement?
Well, I think, there are a number of answers that you could kind of give to that question. My number one is research, just because so much comes back to knowing your audience, understanding what it is they need, the pain points, all those things that, we already talked about. But, if you're not taking the time to learn who's following you, to learn more about who it is that you're going after, what it is that's really affecting them on a day-to-day basis, then ultimately you're not going to be as successful. So you really need to know who that audience is, how to get to them, where they hang out, and what they're talking about, so that you can start to inject yourself into those conversations and offer something helpful to give them what they need. And I think that, kind of to tie that all together, one of my favorite movies is the Matrix trilogy. And there's a scene in that movie where Neo goes to the Oracle and sees a sign above the door that says, "Know thyself." I think that's a really, really key, honestly, that's a really key element for all social media managers and just operating a social channel in general. Know thyself. And that also works towards, knowing your audience, knowing what they're looking for. That all just kind of ties together in having just broader success on social.
I was not expecting the Matrix to come up today, but I'm so glad that it did.
That's the beauty of these podcasts. You never know what's coming.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. For anyone interested in learning more about OutSystems, where should they go?
Well, obviously, I would want to give a plug immediately to our social media channels. So you can obviously follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, all at OutSystems, OutSystems. So you can follow us across all of those. We have a Life at OutSystems Instagram handle as well. You can check that out for some of the cool stuff that our employees are doing. We also have a website, as you can probably imagine, OutSystems.com. We have a lot of really cool stuff on there to show you what OutSystems is capable of doing. So definitely give that a look as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mark. This was so fun, so helpful.
Absolutely. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with more engagement insights. Want to know how EveryoneSocial can provide you with the tools needed to keep everyone at your company connected, informed, creating, and sharing? Visit EveryoneSocial.com to learn more.